All right, let's talk about facial aging. Today we're going to go on a journey deep beneath the surface to find out the real story of how our faces change over time. And I'll tell you right now, it's way more fascinating than most of us think, and the story definitely doesn't start where you'd expect.
So, when you look in the mirror and you notice those first little signs of aging, what do you see? Is it a tiny line around your eyes? Maybe a crease on your forehead? For most people, the whole story of aging seems to begin and end right there, with the skin. But what if I told you that's just the final chapter?
Yeah, think again. The truth is, by the time a wrinkle even shows up, a whole cascade of changes has already been happening for years, deep down in the structural layers of your face. So let's peel back those layers one by one.
To really get what's going on, we first have to appreciate the face's incredible architecture. It's not just a single surface, it's this complex, five-layered structure.
Okay, so starting from the inside and working our way out, we've got the bone. That's our deep framework. Then come the muscles that create all of our expressions. On top of that, you have the fat pads that give us volume and contour. Then we have the ligaments, which act like anchors, holding everything in place. And only then, at the very, very end, do we get to the skin. Notice its position. It's the last layer, not the first. That's key.
Now, here is where it gets really mind-blowing. This is the first huge revelation for most people. The entire aging process doesn't start with the skin, or even the fat. Nope. It starts with the very foundation of your face, the bone.
The scientific term for this is bone resorption. And really, all that means is that it's a slow, gradual process where our facial skeleton actually starts to lose a little bit of its volume and recede over time. It's super subtle, but it is the critical first step in everything that follows.
This is the perfect way to think about it. If the bone is the scaffolding for the building that is your face, what happens when that scaffolding starts to shrink? Well, the entire structure that's resting on top of it is going to start to shift and descend. It has to. And this process isn't random at all. It begins in very specific areas. The bone around our eye sockets actually gets wider. The support for our cheeks starts to flatten out, and the angle of our jaw becomes less sharp and defined. These are literally the first dominoes to fall.
So how does this change in the foundation kick off a chain reaction? Well, it creates this huge cascade effect that ripples through all the other layers, leading to the signs we typically think of as aging. As the bone recedes, the fat pads start to lose their support. Now, your face actually has two different types of fat. You've got the deep fat, which is like structural padding right next to the bone. This is the first fat to deplete, creating a subtle hollowing. Then you have the superficial fat, which is closer to the skin and gives you that soft, youthful volume. It hangs on longer, but eventually it starts to slide downwards.
And what's holding all this soft tissue to the bone? Ligaments. They're like these tiny little suspension cables anchoring everything in place. But as their anchor points on the bone get weaker, and they have to support those deflating fat pads, they begin to stretch. So this sequence is absolutely crucial. The loss of that deep volume causes the ligaments to stretch, and once those suspension cables are loose, the superficial fat and the skin itself have nowhere to go but down. This is exactly what creates things like smile lines and jowls. It's a direct result of that internal structural collapse. And that brings us, finally, back to the layer we started with, the skin. You see, it's the last part of the story, not the beginning. The skin is basically just draping over this changing landscape underneath. As the volume below it shifts and depletes, the skin just has less support. It creases, it folds, and that is when we see the wrinkles and fine lines that we mistakenly believe are the start of the whole process. So let's put all these pieces together and look at the actual chronological timeline of facial aging. You'll see it's a total inside-out job. This right here is the key takeaway of this entire explainer video. It starts with the bone. Then the deep fat depletes, the ligaments loosen, muscles create more pronounced expression lines. The superficial fat begins its descent, and only at the very end of this long sequence do we see those final changes in the skin itself.
And this isn't just some theory, this is a core clinical conclusion from decades of anatomical studies. Understanding this sequence completely changes how we approach everything, right? It forces you to focus on the structure first.
So the next time you think about facial aging, you'll know that what you see on the surface is just the end of a long and complex story that started years ago, deep within the bone. So a final thought to leave you with. Knowing that the foundation is the first thing to change, How does that shift your perspective?